meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. So
There's always such a lag on my end because it still says it's setting up, but I know we're probably already streaming.
we probably are. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to The Baptist
And the Buddhist
with Mark.
and Brian.
And we are on season 2, episode 5 of The Baptist and the Buddhist.
Who knew?
And so we've been going through tons of cool subjects lately. And I just think it's fun. But we want to hear from you guys. If you want to hear a certain topic, subject, maybe just a question, shout out to us, baptistandbuddhist@gmail.com. And we are on every electronic platform imaginable: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube,
Instagram.
Reddit. We're on
MySpace?
Reddit.
Oh, wait, no.
We could be on MySpace if we wanted to, but
Is
no one
that
goes
still
on.
a thing?
It's more like an ad graveyard, but we're also on all podcast platforms out there as well. You can just get a good podcast aggregator and it'll pull us from somewhere, anywhere, everywhere, maybe. But leave us some nice comments, or maybe not nice comments. Leave us some reviews, likes, and shares, and inbox, DM us.
Criticisms,
just random fun fact about elephants or something. We don't really know. We don't really care either.
Really, if you have a piece of information you want to share with someone but don't know who to share it with us.
Yep, exactly. So, Brian, the last couple of episodes we've done really interesting topics with movies and music and books and
All those.
What medium platform are we going to this time? Just kidding. Is there another?
Well,
we could always talk about
mediums.
Yeah. Yes, actually, in fact, we're gonna be talking about the paranormal and the and the supernatural. Oh man, that the wind of your flashlight made it even better. And honestly, Brian, I know you just posted on Instagram today about our topic, and I didn't even see that when I pulled that up on my phone.
That's weird.
Twins.
That's unexplainable. That's out of this world.
Supernatural.
So yes, we're talking about paranormal, supernatural.
We're about to get even weirder. No, well, probably that, but it's the supernatural, the paranormal, the even as far as the spiritual realm, but that might be more of a topic for like part two,
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of notes, and I had to parse it out for this episode because there's a lot.
Yeah.
Because from a Christian point of view, from a biblical viewpoint, what is supernatural and paranormal? It's sometimes in some Christian circles a taboo or something. We don't talk about that, or like, nah, it's all just dumb. Like, there's no credence to it whatsoever, and it kind of you kind of miss certain parts of the Bible by dismissing those weird claims, if you will. When you look at paranormal activity or supernatural stuff, when it comes to just a general person, you hear about ghosts and monsters and UFOs and cryptological animals or creatures out there,
Psychic abilities.
psychic abilities, uh, man, all that stuff, magic, to maybe a non biblical person, or maybe just even a person that really just follows popular popular culture on the topic and everything. Um, go like ghosts are the spirits of the dead. Um, aliens or creatures from other planets or galaxies or whatever. Maybe there is something to psychic abilities and all that stuff. And from some biblical point of views, they will all dismiss it and all discredit it and say, no, that's none of that's true. None of that is real. It's all just figments of your imagination. Maybe some of it is. Definitely some of it could be,
Oh
especially
yeah.
if you're really paranoid and you psych yourself out and believe so.
Watch
um,
too many scary shows.
yeah, you stay up way too late, watching way too much stuff, eating too much junk, or something like that.
Then you go to bed and have really weird dreams.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes terrifying dreams.
And some other Christian, correct me if I'm wrong, some other Christian traditions would say it's all like demonic.
Yeah, yep, yeah. They will say a lot of times they'll say like it's just a trick of the devil. He's just making you believe that these things are real, and like maybe he's projecting some fantastical hallucinations in the world or something. But from what I've studied in the Bible and the 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 things that I've learned from scripture and from teachers and from experiences, it does almost, well, from a biblical standpoint, the supernatural is all angelic, from the angelic realm, from a spiritual point of view, from a spiritual realm. um I mean, supernatural, what does that mean? It's more than nature. It it's it comes from outside of nature almost, in a way,
Beyond
and
conventional reality.
beyond conventional reality. Exactly. um I'll just refer to you for cool definitions. um but and a lot of I think a lot of like mainstream Christian resources really don't, they're barely scratching the surface when it comes to supernatural things, especially related to the angelic realm, the the angelic dimension, as I like to call it. And they they don't want to dig into it and talk about it. And some of the non-mainstream things, and even weirder like Christian like podcasts and shows and readings, get really weird about it. Like, it would make most evangelical Christian sources kind of scared or like uncomfortable. Like, okay, this is weird. um
Break out your tinfoil hats.
yeah, exactly. um you want it to be real tin, not aluminum. Just kidding. um so like, where do I even start with this? Like, I really want to start with talking about the angelic dimension, the angelic realm, but there's way too much to talk about that, so I'm going to save that for next episode. I'm going to mainly focus on the paranormal or supernatural that the world would see as today, like you would see in movies, you would see in on documentaries, on even the news sometimes. Like, what is happening? Like, how can we explain this stuff? Because everyone wants an explanation. Everyone wants to understand why or how. Um, but from a very introductory lesson on the angelic dimension or realm, just what I need to talk about so I can define what these are,
Yeah, yeah.
what this means in the Christian world. we all know we've all heard of angels, and I'm pretty sure I've discussed it before on the show. Um, with angels in the angelic realm, what are angels? They're beings created by God.
With wings and halos and that kind of stuff, right?
Don't forget the harps.
Oh, the harps. Yes.
And you see them in the Bible from before the earth was created and formed, before, well, I should say before the earth was formed in the Genesis account. You see them in the Garden of Eden. You see them during the pre-flood era in the Bible, and that's before Noah's flood. You see them after the flood, which the Bible says before, like at the time of the flood and after, there were angels and their offspring, which I'll get into in a little bit. You see them in the time of Moses and Joshua going into the promised land. You see angels through early Israel, throughout Israel's history, and even up until the Jesus and his birth and his ministry on the earth. That rhymed. Um, we see angelic activities and effects in the earth, on the earth. Um, and sometimes the angelic activity spikes and sometimes it does not. And there's a good reason why. So angels are these beings directly created from God and they dwell mostly unseen in this angelic realm, in this dimension. And I like to think of it as kind of the fourth dimension. And the Bible talks about four dimensions of heaven: the 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 depth and width and breadth and height. And and so there's some kind of weird thing about the angelic realm that we can't see it in our natural state, and it's hidden from us, and God has to unhide it from us to be able to see, which he's done several times in in the history of the Bible. He will lift the veil, or the veil will be taken away, and men can see hundreds of angels on the mountainside, or the angels will appear to people in 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 ways of visions, or just seeing them in real life. Um, and when we look at angelic history, we see there are basically good angels and bad angels. Some people like to call them demons. The King James Bible doesn't use the word demon, it's just devil, which means of evil, basically. Um, so most of the time, the reason those angels are fallen is because they're fighting against God's will, and they're trying to either pit their will against God or go along with one that has pitted their will against God's will, which was Lucifer, Satan. Uh, in the Garden of Eden, we see that they're described as gods with a lowercase g. A lot of people call them little g gods, um, because the serpent in the garden told Adam and Eve that they'll be as gods, and they didn't say, "What are those?" They knew what they were talking about. Um, and we see in the early days before the flood, we see these angels mingling and having and procreating with human women, um, and these that created these hybrids or demigods or giants. The Hebrew word for them, for the giants, would be Nephilim. So you see that a lot in these studies. But really, I mean, this can even go into legends of the past as well, with gods, with these giants. The Bible calls them giants. They were mighty men, men of renown. Like they had fame to them, and they were even worshipped in some points, and not just before the flood, but also afterwards. Um, there's a whole backstory to why there were giants and why they specifically did this, and I'll sum it up in a sentence or two. I can get into more detail, but basically, when God told the serpent that the seed of the woman would crush his head, he prophesied basically that, hey, one of these humans are going to beat you. Like the descendants of these two humans in the garden are going to beat you. And Satan's like, wow, how in the world do I deal with this? Oh yeah, I'll corrupt their generations, their genes. So we see the fallen angels creating these hybrids to corrupt the seed of the woman, basically. And that's why when God looked upon Noah before the flood, it said that he was perfect in his generations. That meant he was uncorrupted. He wasn't just a good guy, but he was perfect in his generations, in his genes. Um, so there's a reason that the giants were the angels were trying to basically flood the earth with giants. And we see that, I think, one point that a lot of people miss reading the Bible is that when like Joshua goes into the promised lands and they're Israel's armies are wiping these civilizations out, those are all giant civilizations. Those are
Mm.
all corrupted seed. There's like, if you look at their names, some of the names are like long necks. There's like the there's Og of Bashan. He's like, there are giants everywhere in those lands, and you even see like somehow they're messing with like the the genes of fruit, because you see giant fruit, like abundant fruit over in the promised land. So things, history as conventional, even just a conventional biblical view, is probably not exactly what it actually was. It was probably a lot stranger than we imagined it was. And even when, like, we see all this angelic activity, even when Jesus was on the, especially when Jesus was on the earth, because Satan's like, okay, this is the seed that I was trying to prevent. So what am I going to do? Oh, we're going to take these spirits, which are in Hebrew, they're called the Rephaim. They're the spirits of the fallen. They're going to indwell and possess these people of Israel to prevent Israel from obtaining their kingdom, because Israel was going to become a nation of priests. Priests could not be tainted. And that's why Jesus went around healing the whole nation. And that's why he healed, because the priests couldn't be tainted or maimed. They had to be healed to perfection in a complete body. So that's why Jesus healed. So in general, like the angels, the fallen angels are always trying to corrupt man to counter God's program. And if you look in this age, we're not dealing with a physical kingdom. It was something that Satan didn't know about until it was revealed to Paul. It's like, oh, he's working in the spiritual realm now. And so instead of trying to corrupt the physical lineage of man, he's trying to corrupt the spiritual lineage of man. But so that's a really basic lesson for what I'm about to talk about a little more. And I probably won't go too deep, but when we're like, hey, we're going to talk about paranormal stuff and superstitious stuff, or supernatural stuff and superstitious, I guess, like, what are we going to look at? Like, what do we usually think when it comes to that stuff? Like, we think of ghosts, we think of aliens. Like, how do you explain this from a Bible point of view? And people will ask that to Bible believers. Like, how do you explain this?
Mm.
So I'll go into it a little bit. Did you want to like ask any questions or touch on anything that I just went over?
I think
I
the
know that
only
was a lot.
question I was going to ask is how does this tie to ghosts and aliens?
Coming right up. Um, so we see the angelic realm, especially the fallen angelic realm, has a lot to do with paranormal and supernatural activity. Um, and I think the nature of angels is what people get tied up on, because they think of them as like some kind of ethereal being, but they're very real.
Babies with wings.
Babies with wings, and like, that's just a representation of their goodness, and they're just out there. We can't really understand or know them, but the Bible says things that are seen are like a shadow of things that are unseen. So we can understand how the heavenlies work by looking at the earthly. So angels can have a very real effect, and you saw everything I just talked about with the with the giants, with angels being on the earth, and affecting things. They can affect a lot. So, like, the first thing that came to my mind was ghosts. Like, what are ghosts? Um, Obviously, in a biblical point of view, dead people, dead humans don't linger on the earth. We see their spirit will go, or their soul and their spirit will go somewhere once they're dead. Um, those that are saved by the blood of Christ go into heaven. Those that are not go into hell. And can there are their spirits wandering or stuck somewhere? No, I mean the Bible makes it pretty clear that there's a destination for one of the two. But the Bible also makes it clear that there are spirits of fallen angels that have some kind of activity on the earth. In Jesus's time, they knew what ghosts were. They knew what like spirits were. Like, oh no, there's a ghost. Because when Jesus was out in on the Sea of Galilee in the middle of a storm, his disciples saw him. It's like, oh my goodness, that's a ghost. That's so weird. But it was actually Jesus walking out there, and they're like, oh Jesus, what are you doing? Um, and so the the ghosts, and I find this thought interesting because they know what ghosts are. In the past, you saw the spirits, the Rephaim, the spirits of the fallen, if you will, angels, and they possessed people when Jesus was on the earth. They could influence behavior, and they could appear. And the Bible the Bible always comes up with this interesting phrase called familiar spirits, and the Bible warns against like wizards and magicians and necromancers and diviners and witches. And it's like, okay, the Bible warns against these things. Like, so some camps of Christians will say that stuff's not real. But when you look at what the Bible warns against, and even things that you see in the Old Testament, like it seems very real. And even if you go to extra biblical references like the Book of Enoch, or maybe at Jasher, you see that the fallen angels teach man how to do some of this stuff, like divining and wizardry and stuff. Uh, One of the probably the most iconic story in the Bible is when Samuel goes to the witch of Endor to talk to the dead spirit of Samuel. Like, hey, I need to talk to Samuel. I just got names mixed up. Um, the I forgot who it was that went to the witch of Endor, but he wanted to call up the spirit of Samuel. Like, I think maybe it was Saul, uh, but don't quote me on that. But it's like, I need to talk to Samuel, and the witch of Endor is like, okay, like she's known as a diviner of the familiar spirits. So these spirits that she divines are familiar, like they're recognizable somehow, or
Hmm.
they know them somehow. So when she does her work, somehow, for some reason, she shrieks when she sees the person that she called up. Like, whoa, that's not who I was expecting. She cries out, the Bible says. Who was it? It was actually Samuel. He's like, why in the world are you bothering me? Like, what is this so important that you have to do, that you have to call me up? And I don't even remember what the story was, but it always struck me that the witch of Endor, as they're called, as she's called, um, cried out like in fear when she saw someone that she wasn't expecting. So maybe she usually works with some of like one of the Rephaim or one of the familiar spirits that she does work with. And instead, God allowed the spirit or the soul of Samuel to come up for a second. It's like, okay, that's different, she thinks. and you see a lot of other things like bones coming to life, and really weird stuff in the Old Testament. Um, but a lot of times you'll see interesting stories these days about some like paranormal ghost activity or something. I've heard a lot of interesting accounts from preachers, like especially in Haiti. For some reason, there's like a lot of quote unquote demonic activity there. People like some like people will come around to these preachers or whatnot, maybe like they're street preaching or something, and they have a speaker and microphone. And for some reason, whenever these people come around, maybe they're like uh, into the religion there. Maybe they do kind of some kind of witchcraft or something, whatever you want to call it. And but for some reason, it always messes up their audio. Maybe there's a technological reason for that. But I've also heard a lot of interesting. I'm not going to really bring it up on the air, but interesting stories from some of my good friends that they've had experiences with some of these people, especially with like divining and uh, like witchcraft, that they were almost trapped in these cults. Sometimes, like the basement cults, um, and weird stuff like sacrificing babies and stuff. Um, some of those weird out there cults. um, and there's just a lot of interesting stories out there. And if you in from a biblical point of view, if you invite this activity into your life, it'll probably manifest itself somehow. And it's not just in like some esoteric kind of way, like, oh, it's going to mess up your life and you're not going to be happy or something. Like it could be a very real way. But the reason we don't see demonic possession like we did in Jesus's time, especially when he was on the earth, or even with like the apostles ministry on the earth, is because Satan now knows that, okay, we're not dealing with the earthly kingdom to come right now. We're dealing with these this body of Christ that is going to take over the heavenly realm, especially from the fallen angels, because there's a war in heaven, in the heavenlies. There always has been, there probably still is right now. So there still can be activity, but I don't think there's much emphasis in like Satan's armies, if you will, um, for that activity. So that's all I'm going to say on ghosts. And psychic abilities and whatnot too. There's always a there's always a thought of psychic abilities as well, with like, oh, that's impossible, like you can never do that. And but I mean, if you look at these Old Testament abilities that some people had, that worked through like some kind of craft of some sort, that maybe the fallen angels taught men, who knows, like it could be possible. I'm not going to say no because we don't see it these days, or maybe there are a lot of fakers out there. I mean, I could say that too about spiritual healing in churches. um I could say a lot about that, and the some of the scams they are too. So good or bad, miracles or abilities. I mean, maybe there are, maybe they're not, but Paul says in his epistles that these spiritual gifts would cease at some point. And we see that throughout his ministry, that where he stopped speaking in tongues and stopped um, performing miracles. And he talks about that which was perfect has come, which is like, he said these gifts and miracles will stop when that which is perfect will come. And a lot of us speculate that it's the Bible being completed, the scripture being completed. So that's ghosts for you. I also have some weird stuff on aliens, but I wanted to break real quick just to see if you had any questions or wanted to follow up on anything that I said.
Yeah, there was the story you related in from the Bible of Samuel appearing to the diviner and how they were surprised at that. And so I'm guessing that the the spirits of the dead are purported to actually be these fallen angel spirits,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
masquerading as
basically, yeah,
the dead. Okay.
yep, yep.
And there's
And because
another.
what Satan likes to do, he's called the deceiver. He likes to deceive people and make them turn away from truth and try to misguide them in subtle ways too. Sometimes they're not so subtle, sometimes they're subtle. So seeing that the spirits of the dead um, would actually be the spirits of the fallen pretending to be the dead, um, it's a possibility. I mean, there's uh, it doesn't, I don't think it specifically says that, but when you look at like Jesus's ministry, that's all you see is a legion of fallen angels. You don't see other types of spirits possessing people. It's always a devil. It's always a demon, like a fallen angel. So, and I mean, they're still angels. They're called devil and his angels. Um, so they're not like dark, sinister, creepy monsters. They're just angels, and we'll talk about that next week or next episode of what angels are. Um,
Yeah.
and I'll and well, did you have anything else on that?
Um, I was gonna ask about. So you said like demonic possessions and stuff stopped. So what's your thought on like people who claim that there's demonic possessions today?
Well, I don't necessarily think they stopped, but I think there's been a large emphasis away from demonic possession. I think it's still possible because the spirit of man uh, can be influenced by a spirit because we see in believers that we're indwelled by the Holy Spirit and we can be filled with the Holy Spirit as well. It's not just in us, but we can be filled with the Spirit and not with the Spirit. And I think that's the same thing with other spirits as well. Maybe there are, maybe those that claim they're possessed are possessed, or, you know, claim that there is a possession. Sometimes maybe it's just someone's wishful thinking or unwishful thinking. Um, and, you know, maybe it's psychologically an issue with them. And maybe that psychological issue is a devil, like possibly. I mean, you hear some weird stories these days about that stuff too. But no, I mean, that's a good question.
Hmm.
That's definitely a good question.
So aliens.
Yeah, aliens. Okay, so I know most everyone like the History Channel will go to Ezekiel 1. Ezekiel's vision, like this alien, this UFO vision, and Isaiah I think has some interesting visions too, but Ezekiel is like the pinnacle of UFOs in the book. Um, and I'm not going to read the whole passage or anything, but basically Ezekiel is at this river. I think it was the river of Chebar or Chebar, and he sees this weird thing happen. And there are these. He sees these four cherubim, which is a class of angel, or a basic kind of like a different species of angel. He sees these cherubim, and he sees these wheels, and he sees a firmament and a throne and a rainbow and the glory of a man that shone like the glory of the Lord. Um, and it's like, whoa, what in the world is that? And people will say it was a UFO, it was alien craft. And I'm not going to say no to that because if you're talking technicalities, it is a craft from not from this world. So it is an alien craft. The weird thing is, oh, I think this trips up a lot of people though. We see four cherubim, and really the setup is these four cherubim with this wheel within a wheel, and there's like this. He calls it this firmament that's colored like the terrible crystal, and above it you see a throne on top. So it's almost like a plane of crystal or glass with cherubim, these four cherubim that kind of corner it, in these wheels that are turning within themselves. Um, and I mean, really, some people think this is a vision of God's throne. Some people say this is God's throne moving around. And I'm more in that camp of God's throne moving around. But when you look at God's throne is in the heaven, is in the third heaven, like the highest heaven. And it's the highest heaven is separated by this sea of glass, this 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 body of water called the deep, and the top of the Revelation says the top of the deep is frozen like glass, and you see sea of glass, frozen glass. You see even in the city of New Jerusalem, you see transparent gold streets. So it's always crystalline and glass. You know, the walls of the city of the New Jerusalem are like jasper. It's basically like this huge futuristic crystalline building, and it's layered on different type of gemstone. Um, so this terrible crystal that we're talking about very well could be part of this deep or the sea of glass that you see in multiple books like Revelation. And you see a throne on top of it. God God has a throne. And the interesting thing is you see a rainbow around it, and you do see a rainbow of emerald in the book of Revelation, around God's throne. So it all matches up with God's throne. The weird thing is like the wheels, and everyone gets tripped up that this is an angel. It never says that this wheel is an angel. It says it has eyes around it. Are those symbolic eyes, decorative eyes to symbolize God's omniscience? I don't know. Maybe they're cameras, like some kind of weird angelic eye seeing camera thing, or maybe they're just decorations. I mean, God likes to decorate. The if you look at the temple, the Jewish temple in the Bible, it's very decorative, and He likes to inlay things with gold, which is there's some weird theories on that too, um, but you see this almost craft, and it moves, and the cherubim that stand there on each corner move with the wheel and this throne, and it's almost like a portable throne, kind of like the uh, the Ark of the Covenant. That was a portable throne basically, because the glory of God would sit on the Ark of the Covenant within the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and within the temple. He would literally, like God Himself, would dwell in His glory would dwell there, and you couldn't go in there except for one time a year. The high priest will offer sacrifice in there, and if he didn't do everything right and cleanse himself, he would die in there, and they would have to pull him out with a rope. So, and the glory of God, like no man can see it and live, and that's really the face of God. But and then in this account as well, you see the glory of the Lord. There's a man shining with the glory of the Lord. Obviously, that would be like God sitting on that throne. Um, so that's like the one thing I always think about aliens with the Bible. Just as kind of an introductory alien thing.
So this is almost a diametrically opposed idea of ancient aliens, where modern day people retroactively ascribe mythological occurrences with technologically advanced civilization aliens, with ion, cold fusion engines and time travel
Maybe.
and whatnot.
Maybe, or just maybe these things are powered literally off of the glory of God, because the glory of God is bright and it is energy of some sort. So, I mean, that's my biblical view, is that these legends of old and alien thoughts are all angelic activity that actually happened. Um,
So yeah, like
cold
instead of
fusion, maybe,
saying
yeah.
instead of saying, oh, these ancient, angelic things are aliens, it's actually
Aliens
what we
are,
think of aliens are angelic
yeah,
activity.
it's reversed. It is reversed.
Yeah.
And when you look in the Bible, angels can travel from Earth, and you usually see them traveling. We see chariots, we see horses, we see ladders, we see windows and food in heaven. So it's a very real place. Um, when you look at where these people are, um, God created, in Ephesians, God, it says God created all things, the principalities, powers, dominions, mights. These are like seats of authority, not only on the earth, because obviously we see places of authority on the earth, but we see them in heavenly places, in the heaven, and we see them also in the universe, outer space. Um, these this angelic realm doesn't just go in heaven and then travel back and forth. It's all over the place. And there's some really weird, interesting things with angelic order of government, basically. But the principalities and powers, those are angelic ranks, if you will, like with of authority and seats and thrones and whatnot. The fallen ones, especially the fallen ones, they're in the second heaven. They're in the universe, the expanse of space. They're there. That's their main dominion, and they also have relationship with the third, or with um, the earth realm too, because those are two realms that God talks about often. And like maybe there are angels that are traveling around in strange crafts. Maybe they're just flying by themselves, but they don't have wings. That's a misconception. Angels don't have wings. Cherubim and seraphim do, but not angels. Um, and you see, maybe they're flying around. Maybe we can catch glimpses of them for some reason at some point. Um, and the, I mean, really, like you have to change your paradigm when you look at it like this, because some people are like aliens from distant planets, from distant realms. Yes, there are creatures in distant planets, in distant realms, out in the universe, in outer space, but they're part of the angelic realm, the angelic dimension. And that's, I mean, the body of Christ's purpose is to subdue all things in the heavenly places. And at the end of time, when the when the devil and his angels fall down to the earth, and they're basically trapped on the earth, that's when the body of Christ will take over those heavenly seats and those thrones and dominions and principalities and everything. So, and there are some weird theories about the Antichrist, because you always hear about the Antichrist, Revelation, left behind kind of stuff. And there's this one interesting theory that gives even more credence to this alien theory, is and that's the Antichrist will reveal himself a as a visitor from outer space. And people were like, aliens, no way. And he might offer a way of not salvation, but like a way of bettering yourselves. And I mean, Revelation we can talk years about, but they think that maybe the Antichrist is revealing himself that way, and maybe even truthfully, hey, we're from outer space. We're like, I'm not going to say that we were cast out by God onto the earth, but hey, we're here now. Um, and I mean,
So
some,
alien invasion.
yeah, an alien invasion, basically. Yep. And I mean, you see some weird stuff with like statues that come to life. Some people think they're robots that serve the Antichrist. and giants will come back again because
So you're
the angels have nowhere else to go. The fallen angels don't have nowhere else to go. So what's going to happen? Whoops, more giants.
so Gort
Yeah,
from Day the Earth Stood Still.
exactly, exactly. Um, but and some people think that Satan's trying to influence and get us used to that idea with like so much sci-fi. And really, when you look at other denominations, when you look at movies, when you look at anything that man can think up of, it's going to happen one way or another. Not maybe not in this time frame, but maybe in another dispensation or age on the earth. Um, I mean, there's a war in heaven now. There will be a war in heaven in the ages to come, and I mean that's a war in the stars. That's Star Wars. Uh, I mean, you see it. You see it. People think that our minds are trying to get used to this idea, and you see the Pentagon releasing information on UFOs that they have no idea what they are, and uh, all this weird stuff. And who knows? I don't know. I'm not 100% bought on this idea of the alien antichrist, but people might see it as, ooh, creatures from outer space, and that's really what they are. Like they are thinking of that correct, probably just not the right perspective.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
yeah, it's really weird stuff, and it
So
can get weirder if we keep talking.
so the Antichrist will be an alien, not Obama.
Yeah, no, no. I
Sorry,
mean,
I
the
had to
antichrist
clarify.
comes from a specific place, and the antichrist is also the man of, or the son of perdition, which, who is called that in earlier in the Bible? That's Judas Iscariot. And what was he? He was possessed by a devil, basically. Like he was a devil, like
Hmm.
almost literally he was a devil. So like,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh man, we could talk hours and days about this stuff. um, but we'll talk more about angels in the angelic realm specifically next time. But like with
Yeah.
aliens, you're exactly right. Like it's kind of it's kind of reversed. Like outer space creatures, like instead of seeing the Bible accounts as, oh, those are aliens. Well, yeah, they are from the angelic realm. It's reversed. It's a reversed psychology, if you will. So
Huh.
that's all I have to say about that. I think I'm going to cut myself off here.
So from a Buddhist standpoint, it's probably not as exciting, or
Fantastical.
out of this world, so to speak.
Right.
And I'm gonna touch on aliens first because it's probably the least exciting. Um, and Buddhism has a reputation that really like accepts like modern findings of science. There's really no quarrel with much of what modern scientists come out with. And in fact, the Dalai Lama has said before that, if science proves something wrong about Buddhism, Buddhism should adopt that approach. And
Hmm.
I honestly think that's pretty sound and fitting from a Buddhist standpoint, because Buddhism's not out there like creating or like adhering to a worldview, so to speak. Um, I mean, we have ideas that play into the practice, but Buddhism's reputation is one of being very pragmatic, uh, and there's no frills or unnecessary kind of sidetracking, I guess. So when it comes to aliens, I think modern kind of secular approaches, there's so many stars out there. The universe is huge. It's mathematically impossible that there's not some kind of life out there. And Buddhism would say, duh. Uh, I mean, Buddhism time and time again talks about like a countless number of sentient beings, spanning several different realms, and um, so it just makes sense that there's aliens. Um, whether or not aliens come visit us in silver spacecraft, I, who knows?
Because when you look at the mathematical science behind that, it's very, very hard unless you have like a Stargate or a wormhole or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Fermi paradox, and there's all these different theories. Some of them are pretty chilling, like like advanced civilizations are ignoring us because we're so primitive and violent, or um, they've like they pretty much blocked us. Uh, and maybe they're just sneaking around sinisterly abducting us. Maybe they, there's all these theories. They're really fun. Like, I just watched a documentary about the Travis Walton abduction case, one of the most famous abduction cases of all time. It's
Hmm.
fun stuff. It's fun stuff to hear about and think
I
about.
didn't
But
touch on abductions, but I'll rest my case for now.
but from a Buddhist standpoint, like, okay, if that's happening, that's happening. It's not going to change anything about striving to end suffering. Like, it could be happening, it could be, who knows. So there's that. Aliens are real, somewhere.
I want to believe.
I want, yeah, it's like, it's not even a matter of wanting to believe. It's just like,
It's like, okay, so what?
yeah, I mean, and it kind of, for me, goes back to the wilderness of views. This is such a an idea in Buddhism that I really appreciate. That's not not clinging to worldviews, philosophical views, existential views. Like the sutta that this idea really touches on. Talks about, is is the world infinite? Is it finite? And was I this in the past life? Will I be this in the future life? Like, it doesn't help clinging to any of these ideas. Um, but which brings me to ghosts. Um, and I read this book about ghosts in Buddhism, and the the author opens the book saying that you know Buddhism has this reputation and of being very kind of rational, very pragmatic, not playing games, and ghosts are an embarrassment to Buddhism.
Wow.
Um, but he's actually kind of, you know defends the idea of ghosts from a Buddhist standpoint, and I thought I really appreciated his stance and his reasoning, and I'll touch on that while I talk about ghosts. But Buddhism has a rich tradition and rich history of ghosts, and this probably came out of the society that Buddhism came out of, which was a Vedic culture. There was a lot going on spiritually in the Vedic culture. Um, and this is where a lot of the cosmological ideas of different realms comes into Buddhism too,
Hmm.
which is not to say that it's not true or not false, because in the end, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it doesn't hold as much weight within Buddhism as you might initially think. Um, but ghosts in Buddhism, it's a real topic, and in Buddhism, you primarily find them being referred to as hungry ghosts, or the Pali word is peta, or Sanskrit is preta. And so these hungry ghosts, peta actually means the departed. And so it usually refers to those who have died and have
Mm.
been reborn into a hungry ghost realm, because the hungry ghost realm is one of the the six realms of existence. So there's this ghost realm, just kind of in the ranks of how bad it is. It's just above the hell realm. um, so what are these hungry ghosts about? Um, and so in the cycle of existence of samsara, you're going to be born into one of these six realms, one of which is the ghost realm. And we call them hungry ghosts because traditionally they are seen as these these spirits who have an insatiable appetite. They cannot satisfy their hunger, their thirst. They're starving all the time, and the images portraying the hungry ghosts are so interesting and visceral. They're usually described as having really huge bloated stomachs. Sometimes the texts say that their stomachs are the size of mountains or continents even. They're huge, these huge bloated stomachs, and they have a neck as thin as a needle, and a mouth as small as a needle's eye, and they are starving. They are constantly just looking for something to satiate that appetite. And being these hungry ghosts stuck in this realm, they only find disgusting, vile substance, usually blood, rivers of blood and pus and excrement and urine. This is all they can find. And so this is pretty weird. And but and this might be a very Western modern Buddhist thing to say, but like, how real is it? And does it even matter? Um, Maybe it's all symbolic. Maybe. Um, and in fact, the book that I was reading about hungry ghosts talk about how the image that they're portrayed actually mirrors like real life, like people who are starving or in famine, who are malnourished. Their stomachs bloat from like liquid retention, and their skin becomes gaunt, and they look like a, a suffering creature. And so they think maybe images these descriptions of hungry ghosts actually come from actual uh, observations of real life, like someone who's actually insatiably hungry. And I actually have an image to share
I was
of
wondering if there were any artist depictions.
yeah. So there's a lot of classical images of hungry ghosts, and I chose a contemporary piece of art from 2015, a digital illustration by Matthew Meyer called "Hungry Ghosts," appropriately. And so you see bloated stomachs, thin necks. They're feasting upon excrement. They're just miserable creatures. Um, and a lot of times, um, no. So it's very interesting to look at Buddhist texts, especially the Pali Canon, and what they might have to say about hungry ghosts. And it turns out hungry ghosts have their own book within the Pali Canon. It's called
Wow.
Petavatu, the story of hungry ghosts, and at the bottom it even says a collection of ghost stories. So there's a whole book of ghost stories in Buddhism.
Gather
Uh,
around the campfire.
yeah, and when you start reading these, you begin to realize the existence of ghosts isn't really the important part of these stories. And I think when you read it, you begin to realize that maybe it's more parable than recounting history. Um, each story in the Book of the Hungry Ghosts usually touch on one particular hungry ghost, how they ended up in that situation, and usually there's kind of a moralistic warning at the end, like maybe don't do that. Um, and in the book that I read of the Hungry Ghosts, it's actually a translation of a Sanskrit text on hungry ghosts. So the Petavatu is a Pali text, and the I can't remember what text the Hungry Ghost book that I read uh, translated, but it was from Sanskrit, and there's a lot of similarities between that one and the Pali one, in which it's the Buddha or one of his disciples uh, either encountering or hearing about this hungry ghost, and usually telling the story of how they ended up there. Sometimes it goes back several lifetimes. One of the stories uh, involved one of the disciples' mothers and how in previous life she did this and was this and ended up in the hungry ghost realm. And so there's a lot of interaction with hungry ghosts and humans. It's the spirits of the dead are constantly around us. And one very extreme example in the Sanskrit book was a ghost um, who. So I'll read the little summary that I wrote. So it talks about uh, the Buddha's disciple Moggallana, Mahamoggallana. He sees a hungry ghost who looks like a burnt out tree stump, naked and totally covered with hair, with a mouth like the eye of a needle and a stomach like a mountain. She was ablaze, alight and aflame with a single fiery mass, a perpetual cremation. Tormented by thirst, she was racked with sensations that were searing, piercing, distressing, agonizing, acute, and she was crying out in pain. She was foul smelling, really foul smelling. She looked like excrement, and she was feeding on feces, and even those only she procured with difficulty. She runs around suffering, piles of excrement everywhere, wailing, "I drink and eat only excrement." And so this very, very vivid, visceral, just like disgusting kind of image. And in the story, Mahamoggallana asks the Buddha why, like, how did she end up in this state? And you begin to see why it's like, okay, there's a moral parable going on here. And the Buddha tells of this girl in the past life whose father was a merchant, and monastics were on their alms round. So monastics don't own anything except for a robe and a bowl. And every morning they go around through the village with their bowl outstretched in their hands, and the villagers will will give them food. Will put food in their alms bowls, and that's all they have to eat, is what the villagers out of generosity give to them. And it's a way of the monastics and the lay people to kind of figuratively and literally feed off each other. So the monks are sustained by the lay people. The lay people in return not only get teachings from the monks, but also um, in 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 the Buddhist idea of kamma or karma, they attain positive merit for being generous to the monastics. Um, and so these monks are on alms around, and this merchant tells his daughter, "Hey, go get food for the monks. We got to get them the best we have." And she a spark of miserliness arose in her. This jealous guarding of your possessions. Think of like Scrooge.
Mm.
Just. And she thought, if we give these guys food, they're just going to come back tomorrow for more. How dare they? So she filled the bowl with excrement.
Of
and
course.
covered it up with a little bit of food to hide it. And the monks knew, and they're like, "Oh, that's a pity. We know exactly what's going to happen to her." Um, and because of that, she was reborn in the hungry ghost realm, feeding off of excrement. Um,
Getting a taste of her own medicine.
yeah, and there are several stories like this. Like in the Petavatu, there is a very similar story where um, they don't actually play out the act. It doesn't say that they actually delivered a bowl of feces, but wishing that, oh, they I wish they just ate, feces, those those selfish monks asking for food all the time. And this actually kind of pinpoints this moralistic idea, that is miserliness. The Pali word is macharya, and it's a close-fisted, miserliness, where you're not just, oh no, they're not going to take this, but paradoxically, you see the others as being exactly what you're doing, though. Like, oh, they're just gonna want my food. Like, I need to protect it from them. But what you're doing is exactly what you think they're doing. And so there's this like kind of paradoxical, almost hypocrisy going on in your head,
Hmm.
which in general, the realm of the hungry ghosts is kind of based around this macharya, this miserliness, and because of it, you suffer this hunger, this insatiable hunger,
Hmm.
um, and so from my understanding of this, it's kind of touching on, you know how not to be like, there's a very, moral of the story kind of,
So, with all this being like parabolic, if that's the right word, um, parabole, um, like, are there natural explanations for these claims of ghosts or spirits or like devil possessions or whatever? Like, is there a Buddhist point of view on that, or is it more of like uh the alien thing? Like, okay, so what?
I mean, that's a really, you know it's a really important question. As far as like, demon possessions, it's interesting because you don't get a whole lot of that within like Buddhist culture. Maybe you do. Maybe in some cultures there are these, demon possessions happening, but at least in the Western Buddhist culture, you don't get that as much. So that's a non-issue, I would say. But ghosts, like, you know, traditional Buddhist texts talk about a ghost realm, just as it talks about an animal realm, a human realm, hell realm, heaven realm. And really, like, there could be, who knows?
Okay,
And it
okay.
doesn't really affect the the Buddhist practice, because it all kind of ties back to the idea of karma, the, cause and effect. What you do now has consequences in the next moment, maybe immediately, but also maybe very far away, maybe even the next life.
Hmm.
uh, and so maybe some Buddhists take a hard stance, say no, it's metaphorical, it's a state of mind. Maybe it is. I mean, our perception, our state of mind kind of uh, kind of will shape how we view the world. I mean, the first verse of the Dhammapada says that all experience is created by mind, led by mind, influenced by the mind. And not saying that the world around us is purely mind made, but how we experience the world is highly influenced by our mind.
Yeah, your perception is your reality.
Yeah.
I think I heard Dr. Phil say that once.
um, and and it's interesting that you bring this up because there's a quote in the book about exactly about this topic, and it's from Rupert Gethin, who says cosmology is a reflection of psychology and vice versa. And
Hmm.
so, in this approach, yes, the ghost realm is real in a way. When one, when one perpetuates this macharya, this miserliness, um, one could say that they, at least maybe temporarily, have visited the hungry ghost realm. When you when you cultivate this miserliness to the point of it's a habit, it's a, almost like a baseline state of existence. Who's to say that's not the hungry ghost realm, really? Like if that
It
is
manifests
your
itself.
if that's your experience of life, like if you're in a constant state of always looking at what other people have, and this jealousy, this this ownership, this selfishness arises, like how is that any different than what these hungry ghosts are purported to experience?
That that's I that's an interesting perspective, and I almost kind of want to save that to go into further into like the angelic realm kind of discussion, even though we've been on it for a while now. But like, I almost kind of want to save delving into that for a part two, if you will, if we want to
Mm,
do that. Um, because I mean, there's so much we can say about even reality itself.
yeah.
Um, man,
I mean, I will say, like we see examples of what's, I mean, even like it even applies to the different realms of existence. Hell realm, which is based in, you know, in anger, and but like especially this Macharia, like I remember seeing an article like in around my city, there's a group uh that their model is that they meet and have a picnic with friends. You know, a lot of homemade meals, hot soups. They gather around with a bunch of friends. It's just a great, awesome gathering of friends, most of which happen to be people who are homeless. Um, so a lot of people, go out and meet these people who are homeless and become friends with them. And hey, come out, hang out with us, eat some food.
hmm.
This macharia arises when the FDA comes and bleaches all the food because you can't do that. And there's a bureaucratic kind of dimension of that, like, oh, there's laws against, feeding the homeless, which in my opinion is absolutely just wildly crazy.
Right.
But like where's the desire to fulfill that law coming from, that people actually go bleach food that friends are sharing, like, oh, some of them happen to be homeless, okay, but that's beside the point. um
Yeah,
and so I think
man.
most people would like look at that, especially from a Buddhist point of view, and say that's an actualization of this macharya.
Hmm.
um
Okay.
yeah, and it's interesting because like in the stories and from that kind of example that I give you. The hungry ghosts almost always act from being convinced that they themselves are preventing hungry ghost behavior.
Hmm.
So, oh, homeless people mooching off of free food, like this has to stop. Just like the stories in the Petavatu. Oh, these monastics who have taken a vow of poverty, like are begging for food. How despicable! We're not going to give them food. Like it's exactly the same thing.
Hmm.
And the reason why this is actually even present in the Buddhist texts is because there's a way to combat Macharya. There's a it's not just a story with a moral. There's an actual method. There's an actual something to do about that, and that's to cultivate the opposite. You could even say to cultivate amacharya, non-macharya, which is
Hmm.
generosity, charity, giving. Um, and that is skillful and will help lead you away from suffering,
Hmm.
especially from a monastic community point of view, um,
Right.
which is very prevalent in Theravada. But
Wow.
um, yeah, so
Man.
ghosts, it's a thing in Buddhism, but it's not as sleek and cool and mysterious and scary as modern, you know, ghost stories. It's like,
Now that is a twist. Man,
and we
that's
will
really
touch
interesting.
more on these kind of concepts in our angelic episode, by the way.
Yes, yeah, I'm definitely expecting that. Definitely expecting that because I can see where you're going with it, and I do want to go deeper uh into that um, way of looking at it and that perspective. Um, and very interesting, very interesting. Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. We will continue this discussion on kind of a part two thing going on, but I'm gonna I'm I'm going to go to an angelological kind of study or perspective on the next episode. The angelic realm, the spiritual realm. What is it? Where is it? And how is it?
Yeah, and that's going to be really interesting to approach from a Buddhist standpoint
Yeah.
because it's going to be vastly different.
Oh, definitely. I can definitely see that. But wow, yeah, really interesting stuff. It's weirder than from your perspective than I thought it would be. Um, you're like, oh, it's not gonna be much. It's gonna be boring, and then you end up reading a whole book about it, and it's weird.
Yeah, I mean, to
Uh,
be honest, like I went in thinking like, wow, it's just going to be a topic to gloss over. And then I remembered, wait, there's a whole book in the Poly Canon about ghosts.
there you go. Exactly. Well, everyone, tell us what you think. um, uh, tell us how weirded out you were,
Do you
because
believe in ghosts and aliens? And
do
I didn't
you
even touch on
believe?
supernatural powers, but I will on in
We
the
can
next
we
episode.
can yeah, we can still do that next episode. Definitely. There are some things that you reminded me of. I'm like, oh yeah.
It will that topic will be relevant.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, guys, tell us what you think. Baptist and Buddhist at gmail.com. Give us a comment or DM on whatever platform you're finding us on.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit.
Wow. That's I I couldn't have done that. and yeah, leave us reviews, likes, shares, whatever. I do have some good questions from a listener for the next episode. It's it so far it seems like our number one listener. They really like to get involved, so we're gonna see what this next one is. And it was like, I never even thought of that before. Like, why have I never even thought of this question? So we'll touch on that next time.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. And thank you for the conversation and comments it's more directed towards me. I see them in person quite often. So they love the show. They're binging it. And I'm like, how in the world can you binge this?
Wow. Once we get if ever we get to the point of having like merch, like you deserve something.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. So get on the bandwagon now, guys, because you can probably get free stuff from us later on. We do like to hear from you guys, but yeah, that's been the paranormal and supernatural on the Baptist
And the Buddhist.
with Mark
And Brian. And my
and
failed attempt at being spooky.
Yeah, the dimming light's always kind of spooky. The dying flashlight. But I think with that, we'll call it a night. Thank you guys for listening.
Good night.